Hi, everyone. Welcome to this conversation today on decolonizing feminist experiences through emotions, subjectivity, and agency. And I'm going to be speaking with Nasrin Khandoker, who is an anthropologist and feminist. To very quickly introduce Nasrin, since last October, she has been working as a postdoctoral researcher in the IRC Laurette project, CyberSocial at University College Cork, Ireland. Before that, she worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Limerick and the University of Galway on the GBV-MIG project. Before coming to Ireland, she was a faculty in the Department of Anthropology at Jahangirnagar University. She has 2 master's degrees, one in anthropology and one in gender studies. She received a Wenner-Gren Wadsworth Fellowship from the US and a John and Pat Hume Scholarship from Maynooth University for her PhD, which she was awarded in 2021. She has written articles for academic and public readers about gender-based violence, feminism, and human rights. Her research interests are gender and sexuality, migration, emotion, affect, embodiment, and post-colonial critiques. Nasrin, I welcome you to Doing Sociology, and thank you so much for doing this, especially considering the difficult situation back home in Bangladesh at the moment.
Thank you, Ritipona. First of all, I'm really privileged, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting me here. You have been doing fantastic work about to communicate sociological, anthropological concepts and ideas in a very to communicable to public and to broader audiences. And so I'm really glad to be part of that. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much for those kind words. They definitely boost our spirits at Doing Sociology. So let me begin by asking you a question about your trajectory and, transition from an anthropologist and feminist from South Asia to Europe. How has that been like?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I wrote an article about that. I think that's one of the probably foundation for you to talk about is that how my trajectory as a scholar from Bangladesh to Irish academia throughout that can be located or situated in a way to form a kind of knowledge that aim to decenter the Eurocentric colonial way of thinking, and apparently it's a very autobiographical piece, but the motivation for behind was to question, although you don't find the question directly in the paper, but to question our idea of knowledge, who get to create the knowledge, and the apparent objectivity of knowledge. So that like the idea of knowledge is that it's abstract. There will be a knowledgeable person, preferably male, white, European or Western researcher who goes to, that's a kind of dominant idea of not really dominant anymore, but it's a kind of classical or fundamental or historical idea that you will go somewhere and ask people and do your in-depth anthropological ethnographic study, and then you that male white researcher is the authority of creating the knowledge, but the knowledge is coming from the marginalized people and the places. So who get to create the knowledge and how the knowledge is created? The whole idea of politics of knowledge production, I try to decenter it, and it's not new that I'm doing something new. It's been there. The decolonizing way of looking through the anthropological knowledge production has been there. But my point was that although there are loads of criticism from 90s or even early from feminist perspective, from post-colonial perspective, those critics always remain in the margin. And that's what we need to do when we're talking about decolonization. So coming back to your question, that how I actually define my trajectory, is that it's very interesting, because I think that's where, when we talk about decolonizing Irish academia, we're focusing on Irish, because that issue was actually decolonizing Irish academia. But Ireland is not disconnected from the world. And that's how my trajectory, I brought that trajectory, because how I myself, my identity, my big change throughout my journey tells about the colonial knowledge production and colonial way of looking at the world. So when I was in Bangladesh, I wasn't, as a Bengali Muslim, I was the dominant dominant ethnic identity, ethnic religious identity in Bangladeshi context. So I wasn't marginalized there in a way, but and then when I was teaching in university, being an associate professor and being a tenured academic in one of the biggest university in Bangladesh. So it gave me a certain kind of educational social authority to talk about what I know. What happened that the way we see the universities of the global south from the global north is that, okay, those universities are marginalized, and those areas are marginalized. But for me, that wasn't the place that wasn't the marginalized space. I became marginalized by coming to the center of the West and Europe. So how this margin periphery binary is actually constructed, and throughout my journey, I showed that it's a continuum, and it's not really in binary. Like my journey, in a way, to the center marginalized me more than me being in Bangladesh as a marginalized society, if that makes sense.
Sorry, there was a technical mishap for a second there. Yes, it does make sense. And my second question is kind of related, because I also want to know if we can understand Muslim women's experiences within this existing feminist discourse.
Well, it's a Muslim women's body and appearance, and Muslim women, it's became one of the most how to say most vital signifier of the current world. And it became a different way it has been, especially after 9/11. We see that okay, before that, Muslim women's body, Muslim women's perception, Muslim women's appearance has always been the counter other for establishing the European feminism, European and Western feminism. So from Mary Wollstonecraft to contemporary, even contemporary feminist, liberal feminist, white feminist perspective, Muslim women, the other, the picture, the image of what not to be, like what we shouldn't be. So it's the other of the anti, how to say, the opposition picture of women's emancipation and women's freedom. And that is fundamentally critiqued by so many fantastic post-colonial Muslim scholars and feminists. It has been like Abu Lughod, Ilora Shahabuddin, to name few. There are loads of work, Sabah Mahmoud. So they have been showing that how Muslim women's body is used to promote certain kind of feminist ideas. But also at the same time, as a feminist, I call myself a feminist. So I don't denounce feminism. I see feminism, a multi-feminisms, many types of ideas engage in dialogue and criticism with each other. So there isn't any one form. So while my position will be criticizing white Western feminism, I uphold myself, I identify myself post-colonial and decolonial feminist. And I think Muslim feminists are one of the very strongest critique. They provide one of the most strongest critique towards that Western and West-centering white feminism. So it's been historically showed. And then for me, being a Muslim woman, it's very difficult in a way that, like, there are the idea of gender Islamophobia, that we Muslim women who are veiled, who are visibly Muslim, they are subject to violence many times than Muslim men. Like, there are anti-Muslim racism in Western society, and there are different forms of Islamophobia in even non-Western societies. And these are very complicated in historically, and because, like, suppose in Bangladesh, we are part of the colonial modern dynamics that we are reproducing, but there also we have a different kind of historical dynamism. But besides that, what happens that being Muslim is difficult because Muslim women's body, whether it is veiled or non-veiled, remain the center. So if I do not veil, if I veil, I signify something, the other. First, before 9/11, it was the other who need to be discovered, or sorry, who needs to be saved, and who needs to be saved from Muslim man and Islam. And later, another dynamics had added to that after 9/11, and even continuing to the political situation afterward, that Muslim women's body, veiled women's body, has been seen as a threat to democracy, threat to women's empowerment, threat to liberalism, threat to the the demographic threat of to be occupied. So, and then that's the kind of veiled Muslim women body. So idea of the Western Eurocentric feminist liberal idea, when they imagine Muslim women, they imagine Muslim women as veiled and need to be rescued. Either they are a victim or a supporter of the terrorist. But when Muslim women do not veil, they symbolize another crisis. And that's also sometimes putting a pressure for the women who do not veil to explain why they do not veil. So veil is such a central symbol. The veiling or not veiling, both remain the central factor of Muslim women's lives, legitimizing, deleting, erasing any other kind of subjectivity, agency, and their individuality. Nothing. So the Muslim woman's identity completely overshadowed by veiling or not veiling. Nothing else remains. So they are kind of reduced to whether they veil or not veil. So that remain the politics of dominant idea of West-centric dominant idea, and within that, it's very difficult to navigate. So when I am in Ireland, I don't look Muslim because the way the Muslim woman's idea had been constructed. So then I often experience, I was often asked the question, how Muslim I am, how in a frame of, like, the highest one would be the terrorist fundamentalist one, and lowest one would be the liberal and modern Muslim. So in that scale, where do I belong? I always have to prove myself that in that scale, where do I belong? And that's kind of outside pressure that I feel here by being here. So it's very interesting dynamics of Muslim scholars, I would say. And that's part of, it became a part of our identity politics.
Right. So we have been talking about decolonization a lot. So if we have to use the term in this context, does it mean dismantling the European or the Eurocentric notions of how we view feminist politics?
I think engaging, I would say, of course, criticizing, dismantling, decentering, but I also do not want to dismiss everything, because knowledge, it has been, it is not like, cannot create a new knowledge out of a blue, like, out of a sudden. So we have to engage, we have to question how that kind of knowledge is constructed and became so dominant, so powerful, and how women's lives in everywhere in global south is defined by those kind of categorical thinking. So that's my position would be not to not, of course, deconstruct, dismantle, but not to deny that this is the powerful framing way of thinking. So suppose if we deny that this is there, then it's a kind of denying the power of that Western white feminist ideas. So engage with it, dismantle it, put like decenter the idea to the global south would be my positionality.
And let me also ask you a few questions about your other interest and your work on folk songs, more specifically Bhavaiya songs. And
Yes.
do you think that they help us in locating deviant female subjectivity and emotions?
Yes, it's a very interesting question you have, because my work are apparently, like, suppose when I talk about that, okay, I'm a feminist, I'm an anthropologist, I looked at gender-based violence, migration, folk song, and it seems like very scattered and separate. But the way I see, my way of looking at Bhavaiya folk song was that position of decolonization, that position of dissenter, that Western idea of gender, which is the decolonial feminist would argue that the way the Western world and modernist way of thinking force us to think categorical way, the binary way, male-female binary way. It's been so strong in Western society that Western feminists have been putting all of their energy, feminist and queer theories, to dismantle that. But that's been there. Western critical feminists, post-structuralist feminists, they have been dealing with that binary thinking for long. But that's kind of West-centric approach, in other parts of the world, historically it has been constructed differently. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying that Bangladesh, Bhavaiya, India, no, they are out of this West-centered colonial knowledge. They are part of it, and there isn't any pure, authentic tradition that often we see in post-colonial studies that try to dig out a kind of buried tradition to counter the Western and colonial knowledge. I don't see this way, because I see that although we have elements from past, that elements of different way of thinking exist, they have been always marginalized. Western colonial Bangladesh or India, we are not really post-colonial countries. I don't see that it's finished, because we carry the colonial structures in our contemporary situation. And even within South Asia, within India and other countries have colonial relations. Within Bangladesh, we see colonial relations towards the hill tracts people, the indigenous people. So colonial relation is continuing. It's a continuum. And so in that sense, there is nothing authentic, pure cultural tradition exists that I can actually present and show, okay, look, this is very different. This is our post-colonial root, post-colonial, our soul. That wasn't my intention. I wanted to see through Bhavaya that what are the cultural elements are there that is not much that has a dialogue and change and interaction with historical colonial relation, but yet remain differently within ourselves and as a form of cultural artifact. So looking at Bhavaya was to see that how women, first of all, two things I saw in Bhavaya. Why Bhavaya is because two things. One is in many folk songs, we got to know that there are folk songs carry the kind of emotion that exists in a society. Otherwise, because it's basically the tradition, oral tradition, if it is not accepted in the social value, social emotion, then it will not stay. So they became timeless only because they're accepted in a way. So you can find, you can understand society by looking at those folk oral cultural tradition. So that's one thing. And when we see that, though for Bhavaya songs, the way the genre style dictates a kind of very emotion coming from women. Most subjects are women, and they're expressing desire, often sexual, often extramarital. They express their anger toward marriage. So in Bhavaya lyrics, most of the Bhavaya lyrics, the way we see marriage doesn't necessarily match with the idea of marriage that has been established through the colonial period and nationalist reformation of the legal law in India and Bangladesh in the subcontinent. So I saw that the idea of marriage is different here. And it's powerful for me because marriage as a cis-hetero patriarchal institution is not really very much center of a critique in Western thought. Because marriage has a different kind of, marriage is not really criticized anymore as a fundamental heteropatriarchal institution that give one kind of sexual norm, that provide the sexual norm for the society. So if we criticize the normativity of sexuality and its oppression, then we always have to go back to marriage, the cis-heteropatriarchal marriage. And what it excludes, it doesn't always only exclude homosexuality or other deviant sexuality or queer sexuality. It also excludes women's pleasure and women's idea of sexual emotion and erotic desire. So that's where I wanted to bring it about the critique of marriage as a heteropatriarchal institution, and that how it excludes women's desire, and to see the construction of female sexual desire that is still there, that you can actually reproduce it through performance, and how men and women both can connect with it. So that became my idea to see how gender also works differently than West-centric idea of gender, that man and women differently work. So that's how I see the gender binary works differently here. The authority voice doesn't always necessarily follow the biological body of gender. A man can write a Bhavaya song from a female perspective and feel that emotion. And it doesn't really have any kind of a certain kind of rule that, okay, man cannot sing or write those kind of songs. So it dismantled the West-centered gender idea. It had the possibility to criticize the West-centric idea of marriage as a heteropatriarchal institution. And the second, it excludes the women's desire. So all three together, I showed that it is Bhavaya. It's not a pure tradition. It's changed. It has been changed towards the history, and it has remained in the margin of different type of identity construction within the whole colonial, post-colonial period. But still, it has a possibility to provide a different kind of critique from Bengal. And I think that's where I see Bhavaya decolonial possibilities to challenge West-centric knowledge and idea of gender.
Right. Let me ask you another question from one of your other works about how sexism and gender codes are used in online battles between different groups of people, and what does it say about female agency and subjectivity?
Okay, so the work you were referring to, it was my participant of a recent political event in 2013, Shahbag movement, and I tried to see critically how it was a kind of event, political movement, but it was is a result of a long time construction of identities, flattening different kind of tagging of politics of like, so it's also carry the idea of Islamism, Bengali nationalism, so religious, linguistic, cultural identity construction has been the key player of that debate. To deconstruct those kind of political binary that has been constructed for political gain for different parties, it actually doesn't necessarily reflect people's day-to-day lives, because for Bangladesh, Bangla is a linguistic cultural identity. Islam is a religious identity. I mean, culture and language and religion doesn't necessarily has to be like it. There is no obvious debate, obvious, they can coexist together very well. Like, it's like, it's the many elements, one of the many elements of people's lives. So, but it became the political debate. And it has a long history of colonization, partition, and like our liberation war, the war of independence against Pakistan. So very simply, there are loads of scholars have been working about that. Many of time they're reproducing the same kind of idea of binary between Bengali and Muslim. What I try to see in that paper, that from a different perspective, if we look at gender from a gendered perspective, all of those identity constructions are gendered. They're the same, same in a way that theoretically, conceptually same. Women's body have been used as the symbol of nationalistic symbol rather than women as an actor. So man has always been the actor of those identity, no matter they're Islamist or they're Jamati, they're Bengali nationalist, or whatever, all kind of these very, very violent, not extreme debate of between different kind of identities. There are politics of labeling others. They're atheists, so they don't have the right to live. They're Islamists, so they are completely savage. So that kind of idea and debate between that is like, it's meaningless if you look through from women's perspective, from women's positionality. Patriarchy, sexism remains for all the parties' representation. Ultimately, sometimes they use sexist language for women to, so sexism, so I wrote an article with my colleague, Mijat Taslima Sultana, is a horrification. So slut shaming and horrification have been used to counter or dismiss the opposition political party. And you can see that in many other places. So whenever there is a sex scandal, you can actually dismiss the person's credibility, political credibility. So women's body, their sexuality, their relationship been used as a weapon of discursive war against one another. So my perspective was that through this battle, women's agency is actually reduced to a symbol, the women's agency has been dismissed, and they are reduced as a signifier to actually use against opposition.
Right. I think there are many similarities in this in the entirety of South Asia. We did a conversation with Dr. Neda Kirmani, and she mentioned something similar of what happens in Pakistan, and I can definitely find resonances in the Indian context as well.
Yes.
Yes. Lastly, I would want to know from you about your fieldwork experience, in Bangladesh. How has it been? What have been the fun things? What have been the challenges, complexities? If you could tell us a little bit for our especially young audience.
It's a very interesting fieldwork experience for me because Mabhavaya is cultural element of both Bangladesh and India, especially Kuch Bihar and North India and North Bengal and Bangladeshi North Bengal. So idea of North Bengal, it's very interesting. North Bengal is not a official how to say, official place to anywhere. Suppose it's not a capital. In Bangladesh, North Bengal is symbolize a place of northern side. Similarly, in India, North Bengal is northern side of Bengal, but it's not really an administrative category in that sense. But North Bengal actually is a shared idea between Bangladesh and India. And Bhavaya is also shared between Bangladesh and India. So the partition between India and Bangladesh, like the way 1947 partition, is changed the dynamics between that, but Bhavaya remain in the margin. So I had to do my field work in both places, especially in Kuch Bihar, because Kuch Bihar has been considered one of the birthplace of Bhavaya, and later it has become come to Bangladesh, and because Bangla was the center of our nationalistic emotion, Bhavaya also became a very big institutionalized folk cultural tradition in Bangladesh. So I had to go to India. But for me as a Bangladeshi, and I was going, when I went there, I had my daughter, she was 9 years old, and I came from Europe, West. So of course, I see a field, I interact in my field through my positionality and the way people perceive me. And that's both work in two ways. So at first I went to Kolkata, and I forgot sometime because I was living in Ireland, I forgot the cultural norms. I actually greeted with flirt and everything, that I am a single mother, divorced with a child from Bangladesh, coming from Bangladeshi coming from Europe, and I couldn't fit into the dominant ideas of fieldwork, neither fieldwork nor Bangladeshi nor women, nothing. Like all the pockets, all the categories of identity doesn't really fit there. So I wrote that in there. I consider some of my colleague, like friends, said, "You are a dangerous woman." And that's interesting for me, because I wanted to deconstruct that idea of dangerous women. So women who do not belong any kind of category that people wanted to see, they are outside of those categories, became the dangerous, because they pose a kind of threat to the conventional way of thinking. And that's idea I saw. I found it when I went to Kuch Bihar, and I saw how women, the Bhavaya singer, always have that kind of dilemma of belong to this formal normative category and also cannot belong it. So that dilemma of belonging and not belonging, they are remain outside, became one of my central idea to look at how they deal with it. But at the same time, in India, I encountered the way I say about Ireland, that in Ireland, I perceive in a way, in India, I perceive in different way. My father is from West Bengal. So when I was growing up, my way of speaking was a little bit, how to say, the West Bengali Bangla was in my accent, and I can easily reproduce that. So I was using that accent, little bit neutral, standard Bangla from West Bengal. And West Bengali, my participants and the people I interacted, they were a little bit confused, because in their mind, Bangladeshi people speak differently. They do. I mean, we have a different accent. And I also accommodated that accent, despite the fact that I wasn't raised with that accent, but I lived in Dhaka. And so I kind of accommodated that accent as well, Dhakaiya accent as well. But I can do that both. So when I was in Kolkata and I was in Kuch Bihar, I speak immediately. It comes naturally with accent of Kolkata, Kuch Bihari accent. And then people didn't identify immediately as Bangladeshi, because I wasn't talking with a Bangladeshi accent. But later, when it became a kind, Bangladeshi has a different kind of connotation in West Bengal. And on that first field work, we had this, Dhaka attack. There's a terrorist attack in Dhaka. And that also created tension. First of all, getting research visa was extremely difficult in India. And then I was not allowed to go beyond the state, Bengal state. So, okay, I said, okay, I won't go. So that's the reason I couldn't go to Assam, because Assam Bhavaya is also Assamese, like especially Gauripur. So I wanted to go that area, but I said, okay, I will not go, because that will complicate things. But even within West Bengal state, that time it was West Bengal, later it became Bengal state, when I moved from Kolkata to Kuch Bihar, I lost my phone connection. I had to talk. I had to call the subscriber that, okay, it was Indian number, and that please give me my connection back. So my movement also kind of, I felt that in surveillance. So when I moved beyond some area, I lost my connection. So I had to call them back. I had to negotiate with them. So it was a little bit stressful, and there was tension. There were religious tension. There were tension, especially Bangladeshi. Although I was living with a Hindu family who are not really Brahmin, but were not also the scheduled caste either. So that's caste dilemma is also very interesting in Kuch Bihar. So all of the things are kind of a little bit out of my comfort zone. But when I moved, and because when it became a little bit difficult, I started to get abusive phone calls. People called me, and I just said, who are you? Why are you here? Like, what are you doing here? So I got a little bit scared because I was roaming around really marginalized places, border areas, and the people who they suggested me that you actually shouldn't go to these. It's not respectful because you are alone. You're an alone woman with a kid. So I kind of changed my research plan and come back to Bangladesh, and I did my rest of the research in Bangladesh, in Rampur and surrounding areas, and then Dhaka. So that was my fieldwork experience. In Bangladesh, in Dhaka, that dynamic is completely different because in Bangladesh, I immediately introduced myself as a teacher, as a assistant professor of Jahangirnagar University, and that gave me a kind of established, powerful position. That also creates trouble because that also means that I will be treated the way that many people will not share their feeling what they think, but it's also gave me a little bit of security and I would say the position. So for me, it was very interesting, border crossing.
Right. I think it's very interesting. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I had a great time listening to you talk about your research and fieldwork. And I hope that our listeners and audience also has an equally engaging time. Thank you so much, Nasrin, for giving us this time and, taking the effort in such a difficult situation. I'm really, really appreciative.
Thank you again for inviting me, and I am happy. I hope the students will be benefited from my discussion, especially when we talk about reflexivity in fieldwork. My experience is more than reflexivity, is more kind of embodied experience and kind of challenging the existent categorical thinking. So I hope it will be helpful for the audiences of your platform. And thank you again for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.